has been following the work. So he offered me a job, and I was like, yeah, that's.
Right, and I'm sure the equities I'm Vivian Hexter. I also work for the Tshuvah Center. I'm our COO, and I'm here supporting our culture.
Hi everyone, I'm Poole. I'm the Senior Director of the Business and Policy Program at Counsel Society.
Kristen Glass, Girl Scouts of Greater New York versus Strategy Development Senior Manager. I didn't know I was allowed.
Joanne, you Executive Director, Asian American Federation. Joyce Moore, former Executive Director of the Asian American Asian Research Institute Committee.
So to start out, we want to honor the original inhabitants of Manhattan, the Lenape people who were here for 10,000 years before the colonizers came into the morning. Thanks to them for giving us well, they didn't give us, but for being the original folks in the space. And we want to get down, where's Deontay? All right, Deontay, please stand. Deontay is a fellow and is the one responsible for arranging the space for us. Anything about the space or?
Sure. I'm not prepared, but this is GrantMakers's event space that was developed in sometime between 2016 and 2017 and built. So in this space, we do a combo of our own programming as well as host other nonprofits, mission-aligned organizations, and then some private clients, like for example, the floors will still be out there because we hosted an exclusive event for NYC Pride. That was actually done by NYC Heritage Pride, like the creator and founder of the Pride Parade. And so we, like I said, we use the space for some of our own programming initiatives as well. It serves as sometimes an extension of the Farmers Market Union Square, where we host like regional meetings and farmers market meetings as well. And then I'm the executive assistant at GrantMakers's, so I have sort of interim stepped in, taking over the space and just doing a little bit of management of it, since I have the most event planning experience. You know, I'm a great event planner. You might find it a lot on the committee, so you'll find out. And yeah, so there I assist the CEO and COO of the organization, as well as serve as the liaison to the board of directors. And I've been doing that for the past 5 years. So yeah, if you have any questions about the space, feel free to ask for my email in the chat for those who are on Zoom. And then for anyone here, yeah, I'm happy to talk to you about it.
They can find the information on Project Farmhouse website.
Yes, you can find the information on projectfarmhouse.org, or you can always go to grantmakers.org and then click on the Project Farmhouse tab as well.
So thank you, Deontay. Now, for our folks online, could you raise a finger to 2 fingers? Can you hear us? Can you hear us online? Yes. Okay, great. I think we'll have to forego introducing you because I don't know how many are on there to keep on time. These are important conversations that bring topics of importance to us in working in social justice and nonprofit organizations on a monthly basis. That was started 8 years ago. We had Ashen who the week after Trump was elected. We kind of illustrious people, and the idea is that for our fellows who we all are all beloved, don't often have access to the movers and shakers in the nonprofit world. And by the way, if you're granted the trust, the next cohort starts in September. You get information on our website here, Trust Leadership Fellows. Shel, do we have our song?
Would you like to play a song? I could play one for sure.
I thought we would do this little icon.
This little one, okay. Well,
So one of our traditions is we start with music because we know music is life to all social movements. And to us, each of you are some of the most special people in New York City. And when Fannie Lou Hamer spoke, the noted civil rights activist who was incredible. If you don't know her story, there's a high school named after her, name is Harlem. And whenever she spoke, she was one of 11 sharecropper, 11 children of sharecropping parents in Sunflower County, Mississippi, Ruleville. I happened to work for a foundation that funded her, which was a great honor back in the late 60s. And she used to start every one of her meetings with this song. And it reminds us all how special each of you are. And with that.
So I can certainly play it, Michael, via my laptop here. I was wondering, do we have like a speaker hookup in this room or?
No, the speaker is over there.
Gotcha.
The speaker mic is over there.
Okay, no problem. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play it via my laptop here. It'll be great for the people on Zoom right now. It will be a little quieter for us here in the room, but
Dear.
it's all right.
So this is Penny Lou herself singing. And she started every civil rights meeting that she attended in the South. And I was civil rights meeting, opening her comments with this song. Using music as a tradition. Hi, welcome. Hi. You're just in time for music. Right, let's see. Let's see. Let's see. There's a seat right here. Here.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it. Oh, everywhere I go, Lord, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, Lord, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, Lord, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it go. I've got the light of freedom. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, I've got the light of freedom. I'm gonna let it shine. I've got the light of freedom. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it go. Jesus gave it to me now. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, Jesus gave it to me now. I'm gonna let it shine. Jesus gave it to me now. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it go. Shine, 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 shine. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, shine, shine, shine.
So this is to remind you all that you are lights to shine. Very important role in social justice fight. So I'm honored here, starting on my far right is no, my right here. This is Joyce, who is the executive director of the Asian American Federation, which is a long-standing granting for trust with many fellows who has agreed graciously to come and have had a lifetime career in struggles for Asian American rights. And another cherished friend and colleague is Joyce, whom I met 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I guess, when I came to, who runs the program. I was getting complete name. The just kidding.
Asian American Asian Research Institute. I tried to make it longer.
And this has been also this kind of life, entire life, working on causes of social justice with the affecting Asian American persons today. And then because we all believe you all should be in the front of the room and not just in the back of the room or on the side, so we always have some of our fellows speak. And so my left is Jeremy Poole, the current cohort of Tshuvah. Everybody share what Tshuvah is.
Yeah, the Tshuvah Center is an intentional recovery spiritual community. I know that's a long thing to digest, but the truth is, we provide services to anybody who is in need of their own personal healing. We are focused in the addiction recovery area, but the spirituality component of it is our belief that recovery is for everybody. And in today's current state and everything we're going through, generational trauma takes generational healing. So I'll talk a little bit more about that presentation. That's the issues.
That goes Catherine Gonzalez from Brooklyn Defenders. You want to say anything about the organization?
Yeah, so we are a public defender office in Brooklyn, and we service low-income communities of color that have contact with the legal system. And we started doing criminal defense in Brooklyn 26 years ago, and now we've expanded and are able to provide representation even in areas where there's no guarantee of legal services, and that's really a big part to the willingness of New York City to be able to fund those services. But we provide representation in people who are facing eviction in housing court, for parents who are facing the loss of their children in family court, for people who are facing potential exclusion from the United States Immigration Court, and it's really an honor to work there.
It was one of our fellows that suggested the topic, which we're very nimble. We turn on the dime when it comes to good ideas. I can't remember what fellow suggested it, but we didn't realize what an important historic moment this is for this discussion. For those who remember Vincent Chen, it was 40 years ago Thursday that he was murdered in Detroit by two white supremacists who presumed he was the Japanese, although he was Chinese American, and he was brutally attacked and died from his wounds 3 days later, and that was Thursday, and it was an awakening of many people to the fact of the violence that this devastation of speak so eloquently as this is unfortunately been part of the entire history of Asian Americans in the United States. We're witnessing, I have a couple of statistics I learned from Don Wasserman, our communications professor on Friday. The center studied by the Center for the Study of Hate Extremism found a 224% increase in anti-Asian hate crimes in 2021. It's a large city. It's a remarkable statistic. And then, of course, in September, in 3 months, will be the 21st anniversary of 9/11. And that was a wake-up call to the incredible challenges that Muslims in this country have always faced. Mosques were burned, destroyed, death threats, harassment followed many Muslims in the week following the attacks. Hate crimes against Muslims rose to 1,617% from 2000 to 2001, to talk about the scale of it. And that's anybody wants questions for us? That figure's from the FBI. So we know that the specter of violence, of course, faces Asian Americans. We also know that it hasn't ceased to face other BIPOC communities, color, LGBT communities with different disabilities that we're all together. And white supremacy has managed to try to pit us against each other over the years. And this is the purpose of this meeting, is to say we're here together to fight for each other. So the purpose of this morning is to hear actual experiences, and we're very fortunate with the speakers and conversations we have, but also figure out what we're going to do. And we're not powerless. We're not just individuals. We belong to organizations that have an important, credible role to play in our 400 plus neighborhoods in New York. And so we're going to break into small groups at some point for people. Now, some of you have been promoting self-defense training and legal framework, which is incredibly important. So many of you are already doing work, and the stories of those that needs to be shared widely, and how other people can advocate that. By the way, the first anti-violence training came out of Brooklyn 30 years ago for women. and gender violence. So it's a long tradition. So some of you already have been on that road of helping develop strategies of showing solidarity, in some cases, working on the policy front. And in other cases, there's an appetite for new ideas. So what we hope the takeaway will be is yes, a deeper understanding of the issues that are particularly faced by Asian American and other groups, but also a nice exchange as to what, where we can learn from others and put in place. And we know, even though this is very timely, we know this issue is going to continue to face us every day as we go forward. But so with that informality, so we asked Jeremy and Catherine to start us off by talking about what your organizations are already doing or thinking about doing. So like turn to you, Jeremy.
Yeah, like I opened up with generational trauma takes generational healing. And I believe beginning a journey of healing, and I can say most of us in the social service industry working in these nonprofits understand what it means to actually stand up and say, it is my job. Where you see most the system built on the back of white supremacy, it's you have a place, you have a border, you have a structure that you play in. My current understanding of what's going on is there's been a lot of healing. And when you rub up against an oppressive force, you create friction. And this friction is where we're currently at as a society, I believe. What we do as an organization is I believe we address the place of seeing a human being as a human being and allowing the space to heal. Allowing them the time needed to understand their personal story, how they have been impacted. We talk about culture a lot, and I believe it's each culture's responsibility to sit at the pinnacle of what it means to allow space to heal. It was a lot easier time back where we understood, like, if we were in the tribe, there's a hunter, there's a gatherer, there's a healer, there's a storyteller, and everyone played their role. But healing means I have to look at each human being from that soul-to-soul perspective. How am I creating space in between me and you and understand that you exist? And the way we do that at the Tshuvah Center is we provide programming that allows people to understand that we all possess an intrinsic value within us. And when we get closer to that intrinsic value of who we are, I know how to show up in the world. The way we support is the group therapy. Again, I said spiritual development, which could be a very broad topic, right? Spirituality is something it's hard to understand. We conflate it with religion a lot, and I think it's your own personal aspect of seeing the space between two human beings. We are given the world to either coexist or bear the reality that there's differences between us. And here at the Tshuvah Center, we choose not to bear that reality. My personal story with my own healing, I was orphaned into a Jewish community in Los Angeles. I was given time and space to actually heal from that scarcity victim mindset that's promoted in this large society of what it means to not even honor the fact that, like, we still will not, we will create symbols with no status. Juneteenth is one of those. I'm sorry if I offend anyone, but it's a symbol without the status of what it means for Black Americans that grew up here without an understanding of who they are in this country. Healing allows that space for you to take the pen and realize that you are in charge of your own story. Not only are you in charge of your own story, the characters that are in your story are also writing their own. Healing creates the awareness that there is this space that exists between us. How we, again, deal with that is by offering programming for free. We truly believe that there's no dollar amount that's to stop you from writing your own story. In my own healing process, I was taught that the values and beliefs that we live with usually carry us into the places that we're going to occupy for our life. And within that space, like something that I've been allowed to do by being in charge of this program is understanding how important it is for each of us to have our own personal mission statements. So after you heal, after you realize, like, oh, I have a story to tell, what are the values that you want that story to hold? my personal mission statements with integrity, love, and compassion. I'll be an instrument of change in my life and the life of those struggling. I'll continue to be someone the world needs. I'll continue to be someone the world needs by being the best version of myself daily to help inspire others to be the best version of themselves. And by that, I no longer have this self-hatred that was brewing from living in a victim mindset, that was living in an area of being disenfranchised and realizing like there was no one coming to save me. The first time I experienced racism was at 3 years old. My mother and father, I'm a biracial child. My mother and father, my father's black, my mother's white. And they're married 20 years outside of interracial marriage, being legal in this country. Once I understood that I have a story that was promoted in this community setting, that's another thing we offer. It's not who you are. I can tell everyone's story by using these faulty things, which are my eyes. Oh, I know what you've been through. I know what it's been. No, I don't know that unless I'm creating a space for you to actually tell that story for yourself. The spiritual component of our space is that soul to soul connection that we share. That's why at the Tshuvah Center, you don't have to just be that addict struggling with substance or sorry. Yeah, thank you. The assist, the process use disorder. We believe that if you're ready to start to look at your story differently, we have space for that. That's what spiritual counseling truly is. And the way we do that is we provide text, allow you to put yourself in the text, and then continue to write your story. So we do one-on-one services, we do provide support that way, but the main idea about the Tshuvah Center is it's a community organization. Because why fit in when you belong? And that is really what our slogan is at the Tshuvah Center. And that state of belonging then allows you to carry yourself as an example of the change you are in the world. And then honor our responsibility that it is my job to stand for the less fortunate, to do what most spiritual texts say, is leave 10% of your crop for the hungry, the orphan, the stranger. And one of my favorite things in my life, just diving into my own spirituality, I was seeking answers in a lot of different ways. And there's a common thread that you hear even in these religious texts, and it's if you save one soul, it's as if you save the entire world. Today, I get to be a father. I'm a two-time felon in the state of California, an ex-drug dealer. I was part of the problem, and today I will be part of the solution. So thank you for allowing us.
We're also pointing out in some cases, what we're already doing is part of the solution.
Correct.
And we know healing, I don't know if our fellow from Rochester, New York, who's on, but she's with the YWCA in Rochester, Monroe County. Fabulous YWCA, I've never seen anyone like it. And she organized a trip to Buffalo to provide healing as one of their services to families and community that were most affected there. So what you're saying, we're already doing some of the work that's necessary. Okay, so Catherine, I turned her up a little bit, Catherine, to sharing something.
So I want to start by sort of sharing a little bit about my story. I want to start sharing a little bit about my story. I am a first generation immigrant. My parents are first generation immigrants. I helped my mother immigrate to this country, which is sort of like this pretty weird thing for me, but I did. English is not my first language. My parents are not English speaking, and that's sort of the force that is behind the work that I do, and the reason why I keep gravitating towards the work that I do. When I first came to the United States when I was a little girl, I dreamed of becoming a lawyer. I think a big part of that was having to navigate the bureaucracies and the different legal systems that are a part of coming to America legally, as the narrative is often told. And that's something that has always stayed with me. And I was able to accomplish that dream, and I am now a lawyer. I'm a public defender at Public Defender Services, and that work has allowed me to take that dream even further, because I learned very quickly that you cannot do the work in the courtroom without advocacy and without becoming an agent for change. And it's remarkable because in 2022, oftentimes I'm one of the only people in the rooms that I'm in, whether it's in a courtroom or as the advocate or whether it's part of my policy work, testifying before city council or our state legislature, or advocating directly to our elected officials. I'm often one of the only people in the room that look like me unless we bring those people there to tell those stories. And the number of times that we hear sort of remarks of surprise from a lot of our elected officials about how the systems actually work and how the systems actually affect people daily, it is really astounding to me because there's no awareness, perhaps, maybe that's the issue, but working in the courtroom every day, the first thing that I learned is that our systems, our legal systems, and regardless of the area of law that we're talking about, disproportionately harm and affect particular communities. So those are Black, Asian, Latinx, and other communities of color. And some of that is intentional, right? So perhaps these systems are part of the pillars that uphold the white supremacy that we started talking about, but they're also racist systems. And the work that I do in the courtroom every day is not enough to change that. And so we believe in working to change that. And the main way that we do that is sharing those stories of the people that we serve. And also, when appropriate, bringing those people to the forefront and taking them to the different halls. Not just courtrooms, right? But again, to see our elected officials to testify at hearings, and if they can't be there, to share their stories. Because that's where we get. As lawyers, we can't be in the room by ourselves. And so we also believe in coalition building. And we work with a lot of community-based organizations and directly impacted communities to advance the policy work that we do. And we believe that we can't do that without those communities, right? We can help to write the bills, we can help to think of how to strengthen certain laws, we can help with figuring out what the different loopholes are and how to close them, but we cannot do that alone because I can talk about the experience that I see the people that we serve going through, but it's their stories that are really going to help affect that change. And as we have seen recently and also just historically, right? Systematic change and real change in the United States has to come and has come through activism. And so I'm really honored to be able to work in this field where I'm able to merge my love of the law and my understanding of the law and this very rare skill that I was able to attain with the work that's already being done on the ground by communities. And it has to be cross-racial, it has to be a united struggle because we're all being affected in the same way, regardless of ethnic or racial differences. These systems are affecting our communities and we need to be able to work together to make a difference and to change.
You both kind of point out a couple of important themes. The value of lived experience. So the value of people on staff that have lived experience and not necessarily the academic credentials, but the lived experience. You also talk about bearing witness. And the fact of the matter is many of the people we work with do not have a voice. And then the third point you make is how specialized our knowledge is and it's available. So those are traditional safety net, but I also say trampolines for people's lives to improve.
We're also not creating vision.
Creating vision, thank you.
Because it's so hard when you're actually in a disenfranchised community to see that there isn't their side of it. So it takes the lived experience of someone to say like, this is my job to create this path for and a vision for what the possibilities can be.
So thank you both. Fight, struggle, long time. It's tired. Nobody wants to let it go. Including me. What's different today than you're a reporter of the history. We know that so much history has preceded this moment, but is this different than what we seen before, or do we know, to what extent do we know what happened before?
Well, this is, again, the comments that Jeremy made and Catherine made really resonate with me. You know, I was just told to go back to China probably for the 100th time in the last 3 months yesterday. And I am a 4th generation of my family in the United States. I cannot say I am a 4th generation Chinese American because my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father were not permitted to become naturalized US citizens because they were Chinese. This is the 140th year anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act. It is also the 80th anniversary of the Executive Order 9066, where the Japanese Americans were rounded up and interned, that's the term that they use, but in fact, they were imprisoned in unbearable conditions. And it didn't matter whether you were an attorney who had sworn to uphold the United States Constitution, if you were a medical doctor, a professor, or a farmer. Just by virtue of your heritage, you were rounded up and put into these prisons. So, you know, when I look at what has happened, I can tell you, I'm going to be 70 years old this year. And I grew up during the civil rights period. I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And I came to understand something about the racialized nature of this society. The reason that we lived in this neighborhood was because it was not safe for us to live in Chinatown. But just think about that for a second. The gangs were out recruiting. I have 3 brothers that would have been amazing gang members. And my mother decided, don't think so, we gotta go somewhere. And so we found a little hand laundry, and it was hand laundry in those days. We actually ironed the shirts ourselves and so on to try to make a living. And so I went to school with these kids, and my brothers and I were the only Asians in the little village that we lived in. And most of the Black children had never met a Chinese person before. And I had some interesting experiences. People asked to touch my hair, for example. They asked me if everybody in my family spoke English, and then they said, where did you come from? And I said, New York City, because I was born and raised in New York City. And they said, no, before that. I said, oh, my parents came from China. And then I said to them, so where did you come from? And they said, oh, we came here from the South. And I said, oh, like I came from the city. But what about before that? There was dead silence. And at that point, I began to understand there was something very different about my heritage, my history, and their history. I knew what village my family came from. I speak my family's dialect fluently because my father was always worried that China might go to war with the US, or really the other way around. And we would have to go back to China. And he needed to make sure that we would fit in the village and that he could marry off his daughter. He needed to make sure of that. So I can actually butcher a duck, a chicken. I can chop a lobster. I can do all of those things that Chinese families require of women in my generation. So that's the experience to which I bring my comments today. One of the things that I've been involved in, which really touches a lot on the kinds of things that both Catherine and Sharon said, talked about, was being able to work with the New York State Education Department on the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. This is a framework that views children and what they bring to the table as assets. You know, when I started school, I spoke no English. We only spoke Chinese at home. And I was looked at as a problem. And every time, and we moved a lot. I was evicted a lot. I came out of a really tough economic background. I was out of school 2 months every year. How I managed to get through school, I have no clue. But there's a story in the Chinese history, families that always talk about how the poorest child in the poorest village in China could study hard and become an advisor to the emperor. Nobody told me it didn't apply to girls. So I worked pretty hard. But I was a problem, and every time we moved, I was put in the dumb class, because in those days, classes were ranked. 6-1 was the smart class, and then you got to 6-6. I was always put in 6-6 because they assumed that I didn't speak English. Whereas I speak New York English just fine. But at any rate, but I began to really feel like a second-class citizen. The first time I ever learned about Mao Zedong, the leader of a country with 1 billion people, was from the centerfold of a Black Panther paper. I took that paper home to my father and I said, "Who's this guy?" And my father said to me, "He is the leader of China, and people don't like him because he's communist." And I said, "Wow, they knew he was an Asian leader." Years later, I was at IBM, and Lou Gerstner, who was the head of IBM at the time, convened an Asian American leadership group. And the reason he did that, as per his comments, was that Asians don't know how to be leaders. Yours truly raised her hand and said, "Yeah, well, who runs Toyota, Japan, China, Singapore?" And I was never invited. Those are the kinds of situations you get put into, but as Michael's question relates, the times are very different. I feel like this is a potent time. We are all being attacked in some way. I really feel as a woman that we're being attacked as women. There's some sort of resentment about women being able to have the freedom to control their own lives, whether it is to pursue a career, an endeavor, to have children or not have children. Why do these people feel that they need to tell you that you have to bear a child, even if that child is a product of rape, for instance? How can you justify something like that? And the next thing you know, same-sex marriage, and it has been contemplated that interracial marriage could be an issue as well. I mean, it's just very, very hard to understand. But at the same time, I think we have awakened. I think we do see the need to come together. And I truly think we will. This is the first time I've ever really felt hopeful as an Asian that things are going to change. And one of the reasons that things are going to change is because people like Joanne who are out there. I'm out there shooting out, talking my mouth all the time, but Joanne is creating an organized effort in terms of coalition building, and it's coalition building across communities. It's not merely focusing on the Asian community, and that's really important. One of the things that has been really lost is the camaraderie, the working shoulder to shoulder that happened during the civil rights movement. I'm old enough to have witnessed the Third World Coalition. When the Black, Latino, and Asian communities came together and fought for things, particularly on the West Coast, young people don't know this history. Neither do young people know that John Kennedy was questioned about his loyalty to the United States because he was Catholic. Maybe if they knew that, Black lives would matter more. Maybe if they knew that, they would understand how offensive it is to be told to go back to China. When you hear 4 generations, my kids are 5th and my grandchildren are 6th generation Chinese Americans being told to go back to China. So we've got to make sure that our history reflects our value, as Jeremy mentioned. It reflects what we bring to this country in terms of our language skills, our history, our values, our culture. And we've got to make sure that other people know their history, because one of the biggest lynchings in this country was of Italian Americans. And a friend of mine who happens to be Italian American said to me how what she was called when she was a child was mind-boggling because she was Italian, because she was Catholic. And she said to me, and some of my friends who don't know the history are now thinking they're part of the oppressors. They think they're privileged when in fact they are not. And if you weren't here, they would get the treatment that you're getting. And that's exactly what she said to me. So again, I find this to be a very hopeful time. It's different. It is different. But we must and we will come together to fight this. I think it's so important. I'm looking at my grandchildren. I'm really worried about them. So not sure that people do.
You're pointing out a lot of things. One is we need constantly need to learn the full history. Second of all, as much as Kimberly Crenshaw's book on intersectionality was a very important book at its moment. I remember back in the 70s, when we got the issue, we talked about gender, we had an organization in Philadelphia called Triple Jeopardy, formed by Black women because it was dealing with health, because this is where, you know, we suffer because of our race, our gender, and our class. You know, and again, that's true as well. The only thing that you're pointing out is the strength of us coming together in numbers like we are tonight. We're not, each one of you here is a testimony that we're not alone. And so part of a community that goes beyond the organization's boundaries and the organizations. Now, Joanne, I remember a governor who will name this, but the Asian American community is the fastest growing community in New York City, correct? Yeah.
City, New York State, and the
In the country. So there was a governor who thought there was only one person who could speak for the entire community, and that was you. Right?
country.
So you, the Asian American Federation is, I mean, our Asian American organizations, of course, go back 100 years to mutual aid societies in Chinatown. But your members came into primary existence the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And as mutual aid organizations, but also as a backbone. So what do you think of this moment where you are
I love Jeremy, you have to hook me up with some therapy.
now? What?
Because I was listening to you and I thought, okay, in that ancient civilization, I would for sure be a warrior. Because what I tell everybody is, I have to burn shit down. That's how I feel every day I'm gonna wake up. And exactly, in Catherine, I too am a I know exactly what we went through because I went through that too when I came here as a 9-year-old child. And you know, when you're a kid, you learn English really fast, right? I had educated middle class parents, but because they went to work, I had to be the language broker for my community. I had to be the cultural broker. So I had to take on a role that no kids should take on, right? Like I would go to people's college appointments. I would go to testify at people's divorce hearings, and I didn't know what a mistress was, right? And I would have to explain to them first, like what, like, oh, Asian Americans, we have the blue mark, right? Like when we're born, right? And like everybody's like, oh, this is child abuse, and I was like, well, we all have that, right? Like having to explain very sophisticated things as a child was really difficult, right? Having to have lost the welfare office, being a 12-year-old and filling out job applications for people because they wanted to work in a factory. And so I went to law school, or way more than attorneys. And I decided I want to practice law. And so I ran away. I grew up in Colorado and I ran away to New York. I've been here for, and I've been here for 25 years. I worked in women's rights work, I've done community development work. And now at the Asian American Federation, we are a federation of about 70 groups that serve. We're Asian-led Asian serving. Damayan is a member agency. We've been frantic these days because of all the anti-Asian hate. Thank you for sharing the statistics. We look at the statistics. We keep track of our statistics of anti-Asian violence. And I get statistics from Russell Jung and Stop It API. Every quarter he'll refresh the numbers. And he'll send it to me. He's like, here's your number for New York. It's not getting any better. And New York City has the highest number of hate incidents in the country, over 2,000. Highest. Language access, you know, honestly, I've been here for 50 years, I'll be 60. And honestly, I would say, you know what I do this for? Because I can't believe the shit I had to do when I was 10 years old. We're still having to fight for this, right? Like, a kid does not have to go to, why are they going to translate for their parents? Like, shouldn't we have some systems in place? That is my anger all the time. my fight with NYPD has been, people are going to report when things happen to them. And NYPD is discouraging them on the spot, all the time. Well, how should you know? I've had some very public angry fights with the city, because after a violent crime happens, immediately NYPD's first response is, we're still investigating, it's not a hate crime, and I was like, if you're still investigating, this is where the law train comes in. You shouldn't be saying anything, right? You should keep your mouth shut. It's been very difficult. Our biggest, I feel like, Jeremy, I need to go over soon because I feel like I'm about to lose my mind. And part of it also is because I wake up angry every day, but I also cry. And it's just this overwhelming sense of grief, but also the frustration, because I have so many journalists asking me, why, you don't see it on the news anymore, isn't it all over? And it was like random strangers, random people, sometimes get my cell phone number, and they call me and say, I want to tell you what happened to me on the subway yesterday, right? Just like Joyce, I've had incidents in my own neighborhood. And it's so heartbreaking to hear it, and it's so frustrating because people are saying, oh yeah, your experiences matter. So much of what is happening to the Asian American community, as Joyce has talked about, everybody says, oh, this anti-Asian hate, everything the community is experiencing, this is new, this is not new, this whole country's history is, our history in this country is all about violence, it's all about marginalization. And even when our elders are getting beat up, they're getting slashed, they're getting set on fire, people, that's marginalization as well. And now, nobody works for the city. But now I'm with the mayor to say you need to invest money in mental health programs, not just for the Asian American community, but for communities of color. We have seen so much violence, we have seen so much death, and we have a stigma of mental health in our communities, and we need to start to talk about it. And I've been saying this since 2015. We need to start to normalize what mental health wellness looks like. And it is not happening, and I know that he's given orders not to talk, his staff not to talk to me, whatever, he'll talk to me. But, and I've said, I can bring 1,000 Asians protesting to City Hall, that is not a problem, right? I want to be diplomatic, because I always feel like policy is how we talk about things, right? But, our response at the organization was really to craft a solution that is very victim-centered, right? Because we talk about everything, and everybody's, I get hate emails all the time. I got a hate email the other day, and called me everything, and I was like, whatever. But it really is, how do we help people heal from what is happening? I think about all the victims, I think about all the families, I think about their neighbors. People who call me have been people who heard Christina Lee get killed because they live next door to her, right? What are we doing for them, right? What's the service that we're providing? And so everything has been about victims. How do we help victims to heal? How do we help their families? But also, how do we help our community to heal? And I feel like if ever there was a moment, exactly like Joyce said, I'm so frustrated by everything these days, but if there was ever a pinpoint of hope, I think it really is now that the entire system has been cracked open to show how we've been marginalized, like communities of color, LGBTQ, right? Like anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiment, disability rights, all of it is like laid bare. And if we don't talk about it, we are never going to get anywhere. And I feel like this is that, exactly what Joyce said, this is that radical time to start to organize. And, it is, we need to have some really hard conversations between the communities, right? So many Asians say to me, elders say to me, oh, but how come they have asked me, do you think Black people care about this? Because isn't it all Black people attacking us? Like, what are you talking about, right? It's the shock, but that is a sentiment.
And then I have Black friends who say, you know, I know what you're saying, and of course it's not, but we want to see more solidarity on BLM and issues that impacting the Black community for the Asian American community. And I'm thinking, is this the time for us to have some really hard conversations, right? Don't we need to bring our communities together? And I've been saying, well, we're all getting ignored together, so let's stand up together. Let's share resources, let's demand things together. So all the things that we talk about, I know the kids call it intersectionality, that we just call it like, that's how we work. We are programs that we created to help victims of hate incidents, people against hate. We didn't know what we were doing because we're not an office of data books, right? Like we look at policy, but literally when we needed help, we went to LGBTQ trans community, we went to Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, we said now we're ready, right? They said, don't read that the rule. Here is the playbook. Take it and use it, make it work for you. And so there are resources, and I've been saying like, it's gonna happen to another community because that's how it works. Now it's all women now, right? How do we use the tools that we have learned, the lessons that we have learned to continue to build and to support each other? Because everybody's rushing to get to normal. Everybody says, I have to go back to normal. Aren't you excited? And I was like, hell no, I'm not going back to normal because normal will never work for people like me, right? And so the fight is, how do we start to mobilize? How do we start to think about things together? How do we start to work with violence interrupters? I sit on the Racial Justice Commission for New York. We have, we're gonna be voting on 3 recommendations. How do we start to think about what our communities have suffered, endured, generational trauma, generational poverty, the fact that kids still have to navigate for their parents, all of the challenges, when that happens, it's the power dynamics of family, right? So I feel like, okay, well, unless we start to pull ourselves together, we're gonna continue because we're already seeing movements to get back to normal, and I'm thinking, yeah, that can't happen. And so these days I feel like this crazy radical, like I talk about the Black Panther model, maybe we need to go back to that. But it is this case of frustration where even when our communities, over 2,000 hate incidents in 2 years in our communities, we're still marginalized. And the fact that I do so many of these conversations and everybody says to me, oh, I didn't know what happened, right? I didn't know this was what happened to the Asian community. I say, have you been living under a rock these days, right? That's the violence in our community. So there's a lot of challenges. I know we have to have really hard conversations with our own community. And that is not to say, oh my God, mom and dad, you're such a racist, you hate Black people. That's not the conversation we need to have. We need to say, you've experienced discrimination when you came as an immigrant. I know you went through stuff because people weren't nice to you, people said horrible things to you, you were relegated to crappy jobs, right? How do we talk about the experiences that we all endured to figure out a narrative where we, in a country that is the richest country, that we all struggle and that we really have contributed greatly to this country, and we're still struggling, and we are still in the exact same place. I feel like we're just running in place these days. So there needs to be some hard conversations. I think the biggest challenge is maybe how do we start to mobilize?
As well.
How do we start to mobilize?
Yes.
And how do we start to be honest? How do we start to be very empathetic and be compassionate? I used to be an empath, Jeremy, and like when people would tell me their stories, I would start crying because I knew exactly what that meant. And I thought, when I retire, I'm gonna write a book, and it's gonna be a collection of short stories where everybody's, you could write a narrative about every single person sitting on this subway, right? And that subway smell, right? And I thought I could write a narrative for every single person sitting on this train, right? And now it's just a lot of grief and a lot of anger. And that is what a lot of communities, most communities of color, were feeling that. And so we're trying to figure out how to create a system change to be able to talk about this and to create a long-term solution.
Wow. I'm I'm glad we built into the fellowship sessions on self-care. It's gonna cover, because we haven't talked about that, is how do we support ourselves? And we said, you're also breaking down the boundary of this concept of a nonprofit as a siloed organization. I mean, we need everybody on the, working with their gender issues that Planned Parenthood is, the structure of a nonprofit is sometimes very limiting, and what you're talking about is power coalition building. You're also talking about the inside and the outside strategies, and what are the importance of both of those. Just to note where we have come from that's positive. It was Coretta Scott King, and Jesse Jackson, that were the first Black leaders in the civil rights movement, said, wait a minute, we have kinship with other social movements, including the LGBT. And if you remember, some of you may know this, the original idea for the Rainbow Coalition came from the Black Panther, Fred Hampton. And then Jesse Jackson popularized it. And so, and there was a term in the 70s that I heard says, oh, it's the Olympic suppression. Oh, we have more press than you do, and I'd like to think this is an example we're past. And it's an increasing awareness that we're not each other's enemy, but white supremacy is the worst enemy. So we're on schedule, I don't know how that. So let's so before we break into small groups, we want to open it up to everybody here and online. Hi there. For any questions or comments, anybody wants to raise?
Thanks for mentioning the Italian American.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Kristen Joyce. Girl Scouts of Greater New York. Girl Scouts of Greater New York, sorry, Prime Weekend. So Girl Scouts of Greater New York, we're just strategy and development. But thank you for mentioning that. I think it pairs actually really, unfortunately, nicely with what Jeremy was mentioning earlier about Juneteenth. Now that people know that Columbus Day became a holiday in response to the origin of those Italian Americans. It was like, hey, we're going to holiday, and also fly everybody down. And then it took the wild turn of becoming some point of Italian pride when it wasn't even an Italian initiative in any way. So I think those mirror each other in a lot of ways of how we need to keep challenging, not just in, oh, we'll give them a holiday, but what is the actual stance behind it that we need for work rather than just, is this enough?
Other comments or questions anybody wants to raise at the table?
Just say one thing. One of the things we have to do really is hold people accountable. When Vincent Chin was killed, he was killed because they thought he was Japanese, and the American auto industry was hugely in decline. By the way, the punishment for the two killers was a $3,000 fine and no jail time. That is what the life of a Chinaman is worth. When I hear that, it drives me crazy. But it was the failure of American leadership that caused the decline of the automotive industry. It was the failure of American leadership that caused 600,000 people to die under Trump's watch. Okay, maybe the virus started in China, but what the heck did you do when it came to our shores? You closed your eyes and your mouth and went out and just raised money. That's what you did, right? So whose fault was that? And the same thing that's happening to all the rest of us in terms of the poverty and so on. What they do is they put the blame on you. When the labor movement in this country started to really rise up, and the laborers were beaten by the corporate robber barons, etc., they said the Chinese were taking away their jobs. There were 2 Chinese for every 100,000 people in this country. Damn, I wish we were that capable. So this is the kind of crap. We have to understand that whenever they do this stuff to us, it's because they are failing us, their leadership is failing, we gotta hold them accountable to that. So it's not just a matter of we're gonna just go do something, we really have to expose them for the crappy leaders that they are. And don't create all these troubles and then blame it on me.
And also, Michael, can I also talk about
Yes, please.
the bottom minority unit, right? Because Asians love, some Asians love that, they eat that up, right? It's the myth that says, created by a white person who says, why Asians, look at them, how hard they work, they never complain, they keep their head down, right? You're exceptional. And then, but what that means is they don't give us the things that we need to succeed, right? We go in there and say, we need all these resources, we need to succeed, you can figure it out for yourself. The Black and Latino community knows says, we need help. Why can't you be like the Asians? They never complain and they keep their head down. And it's like at the end of the day, none of us are getting anything that we need. This is the thing that I always tell people, please remember. And we have been used as a wedge over and over and over again. There is no Asian American exceptional. There is no, we're better than everybody else. That is not true at all. And that is, I know people who said, what's wrong with that? And I said, because you are denying other communities their rights. You're denying our own community rights. And I think those are the things that we need to talk about very openly. I was so offended when I heard, it offended me so much that I cried. Again, when the Buffalo shooter in his manifesto said, I admire the Asian American community, right? And I thought, you've got to be kidding me, right? That is, we are right adjacent. So he thought, okay, well, I look at them, they're, look at this. And he used our community to kill all those people up there. And it was like, I was at a conference when I mentioned that and everybody gasped, but it was like, stop gasping and let's do something, right? Let's do something.
And the whole mythology of the Asian American community, how many countries are in Asia? And
Half the world.
half the world and grouping people of such diverse. Some of my African friends say, no, I'm not from Africa, I'm from Togo, I'm from Ghana, I'm Morocco, it's so part of this geography is facing it, making it real. We have arts and culture organizations originally part of the fellowships. Can you give me hope right now in New York, the literature and so forth? What do you all think is the role of arts and culture in terms of the issues that we're talking about? What would you, we have already Bush women, we have Camille Clark, his dance company and so forth. So to what extent do they play a role in changing the mythology that we're talking about?
I think what they do is they hold the space for once you have the awareness of what system you're playing a part of. Because in order to destroy a system, you have to understand where it works. And we're in a working system of white supremacy. So what these places do is they actually, like, for me, I have a lot of self-hatred. Not knowing where to go, I didn't feel black, white, it was like not knowing who I was. And my healing has allowed me to connect with my indigenous roots in South America, which is part of my father's upbringing, which has led to a bigger family tree. I also have Chinese as part of my heritage, Italian part of my heritage, and I'm proud of all these things. It's not that I'm less proud of the oppressed part of myself, because that's the call to action right now. It's actually on these cultural centers and arts. They provide space to get a deeper understanding of how we got here. Because it also, like, I feel that at times we're too married to the past or too married to the future, and we don't take the responsibility of what it is now. And those spaces provide a deeper connection to who we are as individuals. All the especially here in New York, which is the coolest thing for me. I'm from California, and they talk about being progressive, but it's kind of segregated. And like, you got a black part of the community, you got a Chinese part of the community, you got a brown part of the community, and then what do you do in those communities? Fight against each other because you believe that the resources that you have.
I mean, off the crumbs on the table.
Yeah,
Because
because
increasing the pie.
right, and or working together, like what's happening today is actually sitting and being able to see the human behind. And that's one example, like I am an example of all parts of myself. And that is a huge responsibility, and I think that's what these cultural centers provide as a deeper connection to the responsibility of self, being an example of the healing that can happen. And we say like, oh, this can no longer exist, like we're at a pressing day, we all came from a woman. I mean, this is wild that I can't, you know what I mean? Like the life starts from a woman. And the fact that we're in a stage where we're arguing or feeling that we're going back, but again, I believe this is the friction that's created from the movement that's been happening since the 60s. When you push against, you back the dog against the corner, they got one place to go. And now they're just outspoken, wearing suit and ties, and not your normal skinheads, kind of acting up, but they were very swastikas and everything. You knew who they were. Now they're suits and ties sitting at tables, and the problem with
And
again.
Supreme Court's too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. 6'3" is gonna be what destroys this country, but the fact that we're sitting with devices that provide information, we just absorb it. So you got young minds absorbing corrupted misinformation with no ability to critical think. And where does that start? That starts from the structure where you allow government to be completely in charge of the education, where like they'll teach us about Martin Luther King. They won't teach us about Malcolm. They won't teach us about the Black Panthers. They won't teach us about everything that was mentioned today. Is some of this stuff is like I'm going into my own research to deep dive a little bit more, because I'm hearing more about things that you're unaware of. Because what do they teach? In this capitalistic country, they teach us and train us to be workers in a capitalistic state where we just keep separating. But the destruction of the middle class is coming next, where it's only going to be us versus them.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hi, introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Ria from the Mayan, and thank you, Jeremy, for what you said. So I think that really resonates with me, and also what our speaker said. It's not just the failure of American capitalism, American leadership, but also US capitalism. Because in the eyes of the capitalists and white supremacists, they just pit the workers against each other. And that's actually the history of Filipinos in this country. Filipinos were brought in here in the late 1900s as scabs, which there was organizing among farm workers in California. The Japanese and Koreans were organizing. So they brought in the scabs, to break the picket line. And then the Filipinos started joining, the Japanese and the Koreans. So that's where Larry Leon and Philip Vera Cruz, started organizing with the Mexicans along with Carlos Coluzan. But that's, the systemic erasure of our contribution, right? Not just Filipinos, but Asian Americans in this country. So and then going back to the anti-Asian hate violence, last week, one of our members who was a domestic worker and labor trafficking survivor working the Upper East Side, she's going home to Queens, where most of us live. As soon as she got out of the subway on the E train, there was a man wielding a knife by the platform. So in real time, she was texting our organizing team group chat, she was screaming, she was running. It's like when someone just screams and runs, everyone just screams and runs, right? So I was just happy that she was not hurt. I'm not sure if anyone was hurt. I was looking for it in the news, but nothing came out in the news, right? So these are just one of the many issues that happens in our community that remain unreported. And then the week before that, on the same station, on the 7 train, a man was slashed the neck of another passenger, right? And it was the second time that he has done it. So he was actually a repeat offender. So how many times do we have to do this work, right? We're a grantee of Hope Against Hate. We have done trainings, situational awareness with Kalayaan Mendoza and the Nonviolent Peace Force. But even our attendance is being affected. The elderly, undocumented caregivers, there are caregivers in their 60s and 70s still taking care of other elderly when they should be receiving care, right, for themselves. are afraid to go out of their homes because they would have to take the subway to come to our trainings, right? So we're trying to find ways how to arrange pickup points, you know, in stations in Queens, so they can come. But we can give the trainings, but it's like this, the system itself is broken, right? So there's a limit to how much social services we can give, right? And these are also workers who, at the height of the pandemic, couldn't stay at home or work from home because they're caregivers, they're nannies, they're housekeepers, right? When everyone else were staying home, our members were the essential workers who had to go out, right? When there was a white flight during the pandemic, you know, they brought their domestic workers with them to the Hamptons, right? So we were delivering food, you know, in Upper East Side and Upper West Side because our members were not allowed to go out. They were receiving the same pay, you know, but were working 7 days a week because their employers didn't want to get infected if they go home. But I understand that there is work happening, and I think it just has to be at the level that happened, you know, during the civil rights movement, right? There are efforts, you know, for Blacks and Latinos and Asians to work together, because I think we really need to send that message, right? You know, that it's a failure of the system, right? You know, like what you said, generational trauma requires generational healing. At the same time, systemic problems require systemic solutions, right? And it can't be done by this one group of people. You know, there has to be interracial or cross-racial solidarity.
Thank you so much. And you and I have to talk because I work with the Filipinos in Hawaii.
Yes, there's a lot of people trafficking.
Yeah. We're scheduled to break into small groups now, and that's to match each of your voices is very important. And we want to bring your voices to the forefront. So we're going to segue into small groups, and the only thing I ask is that you pick somebody as a reporter to kind of share back to the body of the whole when we reconvene. Now, Shell, how do we do this with our folks on Zoom?
So I'm arranging the Zoom rooms right now. I'm going to give them all instructions in the chat about what we're doing. In terms of, we do have a very small Zoom room right now, so it depends. I'll interact with them and ask them what they would like. I can put them into a separate room while we here in this space do our own work here. And then I'll ask them to report back in the chat as well.
So how should we divide it? Do you want to just go around the table 1, 2, 3?
Sure, absolutely. We can all just kind of physically divide it.
Mike, can you start with 1?
Yep.
1.
3, 4, 5,
No,
1, 2, 3, 4.
So should we start over? So it's 3, right here. Okay. 4.
Was 4.
Okay. So it's 4. What is it?
This is 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
No, you're flooded.
Oh.
It was 3.
No, so then I.
First it was 3, sorry.
1, 2,
3.
4.
1.
Yeah.
Jay, you want to jump in?
Sure.
All right, you'll keep
3,
floating.
2.
Okay,
Okay.
so, Deontay, what's the best thing that we put, just you all stay in the room, or anyone want to do?
Let's stay in the room. You can like, so I guess one can stay here, maybe one person over here, then somebody right, and there's another small group here. Yeah, there's 4 corners.
Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Some breeze over there. Every day. ready to charge you to discuss current strategies or other strategies that can be employed by your Is this one? This is one.
And so it's pretty simple, right? I don't know, maybe I can write it and then comment too. Which is really nice, right? It's like the entire time, rather than just you see how and then you're there's like this whole we're set up to not only have the opportunity to. It's nice to a lot of people united and all the years I don't get that. Because the city is part of
Folks, we're gonna stop at 6:40, so remember to just ask one of you to volunteer as a reporter out. The question is, what are you doing currently with solidarity?
Family or friends, just want to have a conversation, right? Let's come and say how I let's talk about something fun over. Right? And you'll see it right now.
So they just, and they said, okay, you know, this one is serious. We know we got. So they rather say, okay, eighth grade, now since I'm sorry, but that's not my thing. And they're supposed to make it up.
Right? So my see what they think about it, because I heard they don't think they broke out, right? And I'm like, how is this possible? And this is all public school. They should, right? You're up there and full.
Folks, we're gonna bring it back together. Everybody can use your seats. All right.
And so what happens
All right, can everybody get back to the table, please? I Folks, I'm sorry, I cut you off a little short because I realized I didn't plan to take it. Didn't give us enough time. So, the reporters, just briefly, if there's a single point that.
Can you hear us, Shel?
About the conversation they had, pertinent to the topic of what we should be about right now. So, can I start with group one?
So actually, my group is okay. You set the
Oh, in our virtual group?
yes, the virtual group. Betty's here.
Okay. Okay, we're starting with our virtual group. Hi, virtual group. Okay. Well, who's your reporter?
I'll be the reporter. So I'm Mira. Can you hear me? You can hear me?
We can. Thank you, Mira.
Okay. So I'm Mira. We talked a lot about our own organizations, of course, and just kind of the trends that we were seeing across our organizations as well. So we talked a lot about language accessibility and how even though like in like one region, even though there may be people who speak a similar language, there's a lot of differences in like dialects, there's a lot of differences in who's represented within a specific area, and just ways to kind of expand the access to services and to resources, just as with language as a barrier. Whereas I was also talking about how her organization is international, and so they have to pull in like more like groups of people and like be able to reach various groups of people slightly better. Yeah, and then I'm a student, and so I was talking about how multiracial solidarity needs to be for more expansive past just white and black, because there's a lot of people in this country who don't feel like represented in that conversation and don't feel able to add to that conversation.
I love you raised the point about signage. When I was president of Philanthropy New York, we had a pennant that when you first came to the door, welcoming people in the 8 most commonly spoken languages in New York City. And it's, you know, it's interesting, hospitals do this, but we don't see it that often in many other venues. It's a wonderful work. Thank you. Any highlights you want to report out?
So we talked about a lot of things, but I think a common thread was education and sort of like this really acknowledgement about focusing on education, both the quality of the education that our children are receiving, but also being intentional about communicating among communities and in sharing our experiences where we're going to learn that we're more alike different, right? And that's one way to tackle this system that's been set up where that we're all fighting for the that's it, it was scrapped, right? We're all five cities submitted to resources. Instead of being pinned against each other, I think what we're talking about is education through, whether it's VR, to just coming together and having these conversations, is one way that we can.
I think it's one of our role as internal educators. I was amazed that COVID, a lot of resistance came from healthcare workers. So we get vaccines, and the responsibility fell on nonprofits to say, wait a minute, we have to educate not only public or our clients, but ourselves. That's wonderful. Group two. But you gotta stand up and say loud.
So what we spoke about,
Louder.
okay, thanks. So what we spoke about, Sarah, since I was right next to you, I wrote down a lot of what you said, is that, Sarah's part of the video committee, so she will say all that. And, for her DI, for example, anyone can be there, you just have to explain why you want to be a part of DI, why it's important to be a part of it. So what I thought was interesting is that Jason, that janitors to the CEO are a part of DI. So that's really cool, but what she was explaining, the issue with that is that because the CEO and other employee members are a part of DI community, I guess people are afraid to sometimes speak up because obviously there's a power imbalance there, and the CEO, although seemingly well-meaning, is removed, I guess, from a lot of BIPOC issues. And again, well-meaning, but sent out this memo, right?
He wrote an essay.
Yeah.
It's a 3-page essay.
About the housing crisis, which was not well received, right? Because he has to follow my peers. And that was a conversation to be had where it's like, having to, I guess, come to terms with all these issues, I think is what I got from listening to her, and just having those difficult conversations, but then how do we move forward, and what are the changes that we're going to make? Because it's like, it's one thing to understand where these issues come from, but how are we going to implement what we understand now from this conversation into DI in our programs and in our organizations.
You got it.
The point is a lot of small organizations that I call JDEI, i.e., let's see, justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, access, and belonging. As the new, and so what do they all have conversations about? What are the issues facing their Asian American constituents in New York City? That'd be wonderful. Next group.
Hi, I'll speak for group 3. Anyone else wants to join in? Kristen last for us, that's for you. So we talked about each of our individual organizations, one of being Planned Parenthood, and the way that they are making their services more accessible is making sure that things are patient-centered, which I think is expandable to just the idea of the person, the individual person-centered. They provide things such as translators and transportation, telehealth, and have the understanding to view it from the cultural perspective. So meeting people where they are and potentially where they are, understanding of healthcare as well as advocacy. We all agreed that there was a need to expand resources in the way that they are offered, maybe language offerings, providing paperwork or signage or even advertisements in multiple languages, and needing to expand leadership and staff representation within all of our organizations.
It's wonderful. Yeah. We have to cover all of them. Four, sorry.
I'll try to talk, but I will admit I started taking notes late. So, we need to give people a lexicon around solidarity. We need to help them understand how their attitudes and their words affect what's happening around them, because In some instances, right, people are well-meaning, but they don't know how to say what it is that they want to say, and sometimes they're just misinformed. We talked a lot about how disinformation online drives the perceptions of other groups of color among particular groups of color, and how we just need, and someone else mentioned education, we need to educate people about the right way to speak about other groups and the right way to interact with other groups. And then someone made the point about if someone's trying to give your community, Asian, Black, Indigenous, something, right, in a particular place, and they're not giving it like money, they're not giving it to the other groups, it's okay to turn it down and make a fuss, because you don't want to don't want your group to form even more of a wedge between you and the other groups of color. So that's what I got. So would someone else in our group like to
You want to
add anything
add,
else?
also want to add? Oh, right.
Yay. We also, after this moment, I think, wanted to make a personal commitment. So we have a fellow who was at StoryCorps.
Oh.
So I'm gonna call her and ask that, and you know, they've been, I don't know how good they've been, I know they've done Asian American stories, but I think they could do a lot more, so I will ask her if, because one of the richnesses that you all communicated is the power of our personal stories. And we're just representative of, I mean, it was so, and your stories are so moving, it started this off, but everything. So, Joy, is what do you wish for us at this point?
Us.
The community of leadership fellows that, of course, you have been a part, you had 3 fellows from the Federation of Reviews, not to mention your affiliated organizations. What do you wish from this community?
I wish that you would keep in touch. I wish that we would support each other. It's easy from, you move on to a class and then go to another class, I know that my deputy did it, she still keeps in touch with some of her colleagues. And I think that's really powerful, because these are the really important relationships that will get policies moving.
We had a wonderful, that's also something we haven't talked about, is the possibility of fellowship organizations collaborating. So we had God's Love We Deliver, which knows that we have some Wheels program for people with chronic illnesses who are homebound. They linked up with an arts organization to do an exhibit from another fellow on food insecurity. Deontay, where are you? So if there is an opportunity for us to collaborate, because one of the strengths we have of the fellowship is we represent, youth development, community development, human rights, disability, mental health, environmental justice. So it is a very diverse community that you all can represent. What do you wish for us?
I wish that you keep talking to one another, so that we can find out what our commonalities are, right? One of our colleagues here brought that up. She invited a family to come visit, completely different culture, and they realized there were so many similarities. So across issues like food insecurity, etc., if we get to know one another in the context of food insecurity, you would begin to realize that in each one of our communities that is an issue. And then that becomes an issue around which we coalesce, right? And the same thing goes for reproductive health and all of these other issues that our children face. In the Asian community, a child coming out in terms of their sexual orientation is a very difficult process, for example. Could there be support there? Can we learn from your history and how you dealt with certain issues? So when Joanne calls up somebody to ask, how did you handle this so she doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, for example, that's exactly what we're talking about. We should be creating playbooks. We should be creating strategies that we can adopt and modify for our needs and not trying to struggle with it on our own.
And when I take off that we should have a value of inclusion. that we all should be, that's a value we all should share. And some of our organizations are doing that, right? But that's a value of including everybody, regardless of who they are and so forth. Michelle is our official photographer. What I would suggest is I'd like to capture this moment with a photograph, so we can all line up against this wall. So we can then share with everybody.
I said, line up around the computer so the Zoom people
I think it's, ooh, okay, so I can't move it too far. Let me close the shot. We're taking a photo. We're taking a photo. Hold on.
Did you know that Vincent Chan story? Yeah, it's a common thing.
Okay, I think that's our cue to go.
I think so.
It's still recording, but it sounds like it's all over.
Should we just wait for Shao or Tanae?